Strong Dads wants to thank Quality Auto Mart for joining us as a sponsor. Quality Auto Mart was born in 1985. They are owned and operated by Mark and Nancy Repke. Quality Auto Mart provides all the services, repairs, and maintenance for your vehicle's needs with a 3-year auto parts and labor warranty. They offer complimentary vehicle safety inspection and estimates. Also, they offer a shuttle service, and the 4th oil change is always on them. They are located at 7307 on State Road 46 in Batesville, Indiana. Make sure you give them a call at 812-934-2301.
And welcome to Strong Dads. This is Merle Hutchinson, being joined by Kyle Crawford. Woo! What's up, Kyle?
Oh, not much. Just got back from my golf trip.
How'd you do?
We did all right. Team Blue took the dub, so I'm very excited about that.
Yeah. Yeah, everything, is it all scramble type format?
There's some scrambles, some play your own ball, so it's kind of a mixture. It was 16 of us, so it was
oh my gosh.
Logistically, it was a nightmare since I'm the one running it. And I got some guys that come with us 16 that kind of show up like right at tea time. I'm like, guys, look, with 16 people.
You must be dealing with men.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. But no, it was a blast. We had a really good time. So
good deal.
Yep. How you been?
Been doing pretty well.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm getting kids shipped off to school.
I know. First day of school
started.
Here.
Yeah. As we record this is the first day of school back for the 2022 school year. Mm-hmm. So they were also just a little anxious is what they were.
All right. I like it.
Yeah.
I like it.
So
what we got going on today?
Man, I got to tell you. So, with all of our shows, we think about what we're going to talk about and, spend some time prepping with that. But this particular show has probably been the heaviest on my heart in a long time. And I think it's because I keep getting bombarded with it.
Okay.
I wish I could say that this was going to be a fun show, that we were going to be able to be silly and be our knucklehead self, but that's just not going to be able to be the case here today. And I think because there's so much material, I want to do it the best justice that I think we can.
Sure.
And we're going to run this in 2 parts.
Okay. I like it.
So we're going to talk about, with the title that I have on this today is Power plus Control equals Abuse. We're going to be talking about spousal abuse or relationship abuse.
Okay.
Relationship abuse. And I think the reason here why it's been laying so heavy with me is I'm just getting a boatload of it. I have been since as long as I've been working with couples.
Sure.
But for whatever reason, probably the last 6, 7, 8 months, I'm just getting one after the next.
Wow.
And it's never easy. Every one of those is hard. In lots of emotion in those sessions and stuff. And I wish I could tell you that the success rate is like fantastic and we get it all fixed up and everything's ready, but it's not the case. I mean, there is success for sure. That's why we're going to talk about it, because if there wasn't, we would approach it differently. But and also it's messy because you've got kids involved, you got finances involved, you got homes involved, you got careers, you got all these other things that are attached. So anyway, the whole thing is just kind of messy. So I just ask our listeners today is more than anything, I think hopefully this will be an educational sort of thing, because abuse, a lot of us think of abuse as the physical side, the violent side.
Absolutely.
And that's totally legit. I mean, that's
definitely a form of abuse.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Definitely a form. But that's not very often do I actually see that.
Sure.
Right? I mean, I can identify those kinds of things, and I do see that, but mostly I see a lot of psychological, sexual, financial, spiritual, manipulation, control, power, in those areas.
Yeah.
And they're so much more subtle that Linda and I did a show and we called them The Mask, because you can kind of hide behind them.
Yeah.
And these are couples that are doing regular life shoulder to shoulder with you. You're going to church with them. You're going to school with them. You're at the ballpark with them. So it's often right in front of your face. It's often in your own marriage, you and I talked before we hit the record button that a lot of the things we're going to talk about today, you and I we can be guilty of.
Yeah.
All right. Now, whether we can call it a level of abuse or not, that's going to be part of what we talk about.
Yep.
But so there's just so much here. So that's going to be the first part of this show where we're going to actually dissect it a little bit more from the victim perspective. And then the second part is I feel an obligation here that we are talking to men. And let's just call it out. Men are primarily the abusers. Now, again, I'm not saying women are not abusers at all. Right. I mean, that happens a lot, okay? Right. But the primary crime here is man to woman, okay? And so here we are, Strong Dads podcast, and a lot of our education is to try to help, challenge, and encourage men. And I think we would be completely remiss if we didn't have a hard call out on men during this show. And so, but it's not the deal of kicking them to the curb. Yep. As I said, like most of the guys I deal with, I mean, I'd go have a beer with. Sure. I'd do life with them, and they don't come into me with a gun or a knife, and I'm feeling intimidated that way. They're not this kind of evil person. Right. But what is going on? Okay, and so there's a ton of fear and insecurity, but it's always covered by a mask. And so a part of our part two of this show, I really want to go, well, let's go after the man in terms of how can we help him? Yep. I mean, if he's the abuser and we just throw him out, he's just going to keep abusing, right? So what does the rehab or the healing process look like for the man? So anyway, that is a kind of a big overview. We're going to get into a lot of this. And let's just get rolling. Yeah,
and I think hopefully you guys don't turn this off, because if you don't see yourself in this idea of the actual the psychological abuse, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, man, I think similar to what you're saying, Merle, that at there's different points in times in my marriage. I know there's been I know Linda talks all the time about this idea of a slow fade. That sometimes no man jumps into a marriage thinking I'm gonna start to abuse psychologically abuse my wife. At least I hope not. Good night. I hope not. Yeah,
right. No good man.
No good man. Right. Yeah. But I think as we kind of jump into this and some of the things we're going to start to talk about, like these signs, these early signs of abuse, man, hopefully that if there's something there that kind of like stabs you in the heart, like, holy cow, I've done that before. The hope is, this isn't necessarily like, man, condemning you, but like, let's get better as men, as collectively, because it is our job as men to continue to build and continue to uplift our wife, in the hopes that, ultimately becoming strong men and strong dads, what our kids need. So, man, don't turn us off here. This is, when Merle said we're going to jump into this idea of abuse, I immediately was like, whoa, like that's a pretty tough one. In my world, I see a lot of the physical abuse. I don't get to see,
as an EMT, paramedic,
as a paramedic, we see a lot of the actual physical side of the abuse, where a lot of what you're dealing with is more of the psychological, and we're going to jump into all that. So, man, I hope you guys are along, ready to kind of jump into this with us. This isn't a topic that's going to be easy to talk about, but again, that's what we're here. We're tackling all topics associated with men, and this is obviously one of those. So
it's one. So let's thank our sponsors. Hey, by the way, we have a brand new sponsor on board. We want to thank Mark and Nancy Repke, owners and operators of Quality Auto Mart. And I believe they actually call themselves Quality Auto Mart and Service, because they not only deal with some sales of things, but they are a full service shop. And so Quality Auto Mart is located outside of Batesville, Indiana, on Route 46. It's east of Batesville. So for any of your automotive needs, repairs, services, any type of thing like that, give those guys a call. Here's their phone number. It's 812-934-2301. So we'll be running those ads now for some time. So we want to just welcome Mark and Nancy and Quality Auto Mart for coming alongside of Strong Dads and being part of what we do with our messaging.
Love it. Yeah, we'd also like to thank Casey Outdoor Solutions. Check them out. Summer is winding down. The heat is still here. The heat is still here, but check out Casey's Outdoor Solutions. Let them know we sent you up there. Really do appreciate them. They got awesome facility, decor, landscaping needs. Let them know how much we really do appreciate them. So thanks so much for them.
All right, very good. So let's get hot and heavy here into some of the topic. And again, we're going to be talking initially here just about spousal abuse or relationship abuse, and I don't say spouse all the time because a lot of our couples live together.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about the relationship abuse that happens, and so a lot of what we're going to talk about is not just made up by Kyle and I or the work that Lynn and I do. Yes, I want to talk firsthand what we see, but just some of the statistics here. This is from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. So just some statistics. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men will experience a physical violence from an intimate partner in their lifetime. Okay, so that doesn't mean it's ongoing all the time, but at some point in time, somebody's going to do something physically, a push, a shove, something like that.
Yeah, and to your point that we were talking about before, that this is, we're going to call it out for what it is. This is predominantly a man issue. This statistic that 76% of the time it's a man that is physically, and again we're in the physical abuse part of this, physically abuse a woman. So yeah. and then the other part of that is 24% is the woman physically abusing the man. So again, this is a man issue. This is again not coming from our brains. This is something the statistics obviously prove.
Yeah. Also, I think a significant factor here is that it's estimated that only about half or so actually get reported to law enforcement, to the authorities. And so that's pretty scary too, because that makes you realize how much is hidden, how much is happening behind doors for so many different reasons, right? But so, there's a lot, and we see this when, I can think of cases where I say, well, why didn't you press charges? I just didn't think that was going to help at the time. And so it's like, well, there's another case. And so that happens pretty frequently.
Yeah. And man, this is something I'm not in that world. This is a foreign thought to me, but I've been on runs before where the woman, she was actually physically abused by her husband, by her, domestic partner, whatever you want to call it. And the cops are literally, arresting the man after he did that, and she is sticking up for him, and she's saying, no, I don't want to press charges, like I don't want this. And it's just that, to me, that form of a psychological warfare that's going on, man, that's heavy stuff.
Yeah. How about some other different forms? There's, again, I think this is kind of a hard stat to actually grab, because I don't think most of this gets reported, but it is reported that nearly 10% of women will admit to saying they were raped by their partner.
Wow.
Okay? In other words, forcibly being put upon by their partner to have sex totally against their will. And so I got to think that number is even higher.
Yeah.
But the idea that you would at least get almost 10% that would say, that happens in our relationship. So that's a pretty crazy number.
Well, and part of the sexual assault, that statistics is exactly what we, you kind of titled this show, this power plus control.
Yeah.
And man, because men physically have a dominance over women most of the time.
Yeah.
I think that the sexual abuse, man, that just it kind of like solidifies that idea of power.
Yeah.
Some of the other ones you wrote down, this idea of stalking, that 66%, of women report, being stalked. Like, that is a crazy, crazy high number. And again, this is all just numbers that are actually being reported, right?
Yeah.
But man, the idea of someone stalking and kind of having that, again, that kind of feeds right into the idea of psychological, abuse, that you're feeling threatened because someone is actually like following you or paying or watching you, what you're doing when you're not wanting to be watched. I think 66%, that's a huge number.
I think we have to be even more aware of what stalking is evolving into.
Yeah.
It used to be kind of that physical, and it still is, that physical, like I'm going to follow you in my car and see whether you're actually going to work or that kind of thing. But now that stalking is largely, I'm going to look at your text feeds, your social media. And, Lynn and I, when we talk all the time, we say, hey, we need to have open transparency. But when you have an unhealthy relationship, you are sneaking peering in to your partner's private world, so to speak.
Yeah.
And because you're trying to look for something. And so there's a whole different level of stalking that's going on.
Well, that's crazy you say that, because I know of someone that this turned on the GPS on their girlfriend's phone.
Yeah.
Because obviously now, like you said, it's not the physical stalking
Right.
so much. Now, good night. You can see where anybody is at any time. You know, if you turn on GPS on someone's phone, you know exactly where they're at all times.
Yeah.
Like that kind of like
that's their method of stalking,
Exactly.
and that is very prevalent.
Yeah.
Okay. Now it's one thing, I want to be clear here. It's one thing if both husband and wife look at each other and say, "Hey, let's both turn our GPS on, just so because we can both be aware."
Yeah, for
safety reasons.
Safety reasons. Yep,
okay.
Absolutely.
And that's how it's often masqueraded too.
That's
I just want to know, just in case I ever need to know to help. So it really gets kind of fuzzy there. But
I think that this idea, like if you're doing that, that's one thing. But if it's a daily thing where you're like, okay, I need to check in to see where she's at. I think when it's that perpetual cycle of constantly checking in, constantly doing that, stalking. If it's there for safety and you can't get a hold of your wife, and you're like, where the heck is she?
Yeah.
And you pull up your phone, I think that's one thing. But if it's a daily thing, which is the person I'm thinking of, that was a daily thing.
Yeah, you're spot on. And so I think that's this is major stalking, and you can do it within your own home.
Yep.
Homicide, I think this, I really don't, man, there's all kinds of statistics on this, and this is obviously not something that Linda and I deal with, but 1 in 3 female murder victims and 1 in 20 male murder victims are killed by their intimate partner. Or by a intimate partner, somebody that they were in relationship with. And so, we know that we see that come across the news all the time where, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, husband, wife kills their partner. So crazy things. The psychology part. Let's go through some of the ways that the psychology is done. All right. So let's go through some of that so that we can point out kind of like the stalking, which is a big psychology thing.
Yeah.
Right. But let's go through and talk about like how you see a pattern. And I want to illustrate or magnify the word pattern here, because pattern, you and I, as we went through this list and talking a little bit, like, I could be guilty of any one of those things, okay? But it is the repetitive pattern, and then we see they come in cycles.
Yeah.
They come in cycles. And so if a lot of this abuse is like, well, everything fell apart, and then we got it back together, and we were good for 2 or 3 months, and then we went back into it, and he started doing this again, or she started this. So let's run through some of these. How about that first one you see there?
Yeah. So this first one, this idea of humiliating you're the person you're abusing, and as I think about this, I almost see this as 2 parts of this idea of humiliating the person that you're abusing. And this is something I think a lot of guys can relate to, because if you were to say, do you humiliate your wife? I think a lot of guys are like, well, no, why would I do that, right?
Yeah.
But then put yourself in your workplace. Are you the person that's like, man, my old lady, back home, she did this, this, and this. And although you're not actually, and maybe in your eyes, you can justify the way in which you talk about your wife. But man, this is something I know for myself personally. I have made this a point because I work with a lot of guys who this is, so we sit around the kitchen table, and this is the normal talk. This is the quote unquote locker room talk. This idea of humiliating, I think is when you're not with that person. And then obviously, yes, when you're at home, are we, and this is where Jenny and I will poke fun at each other, right? We do this a lot. So this is that idea. Then at what point are you actually humiliating? Are you actually like taking it too far? You're actually digging in, and you're like opening some wounds that man don't need to be there. So I think there's kind of 2 parts to this idea of humiliating the person that's being abused, like when you're not with them, and then when you are with them. And I just think, again, if you were to ask the normal man, the guys that I hang out with, like, are you abusive? Are you in a sense of humiliating? I would say most of them are like, oh no. But then when you kind of open up a little bit, and again, this is myself talking. This is something that I fall into sometimes. When I'm just around Jenny, I'll poke fun at her, right? And it's just like, at what point are you actually taking it too far?
Right. Well, and humiliating a lot of times is when you're doing it in the presence of other people.
Yeah.
And in the case of, basically you're pointing out their deficit or their weakness or mistake in front of others so that it causes a level of embarrassment.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I've been guilty of that. And we started. It starts as jokes, right?
Yep.
You know, but then the next thing you know, you're kind of a little heavier with it. Yep. How about this one? The idea of controlling what the victim can and cannot do. Man, this one takes on all kinds of different colors. The idea of controlling finances. Here, I'm going to give you this much money every week. You don't need any more. You don't, and it's always like, I'm doing this for your best good. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You don't spend money well, so I'm going to just give you this $10 a week, this $100 a week, whatever the amount is, it doesn't matter. It's the idea of, I'm going to give you this, but you don't get your fingers on anything else. I'm going to control it. Mm-hmm. I'm going to control how much time you have in the car to drive. I'm going to control what friends you're going to associate with. I'm going to control when you get to go out. Mm-hmm. I'm going to control what clothes you wear. Okay. And when I say control, heavily influence is, and most guys will say, oh, I don't control that. No, you have a heavy influence. Well, why are you wearing that? Well, do you really need to do this? Mm-hmm. And so this controlling, the idea that you have to have a weigh-in on all of these individual things, these separate things, is very much you being insecure and trying to then grab that control.
Yeah. So this next one, this idea of withholding information, when you have guys, you know, or couples that come into you, what type of information are you kind of, you know, seeing in the sense of being withheld? Is this like, I don't want to tell my wife that I'm going to the bar tonight, or is it I don't want to tell them, you know, I'm spending XYZ money? Or like what are some of the things you're seeing as far as guys, you know, withholding from their wife?
All the above. There, a lot of what they withhold is time expenditures, money expenditures, okay, and relationship experiences. Yeah. And so you don't need to know about who I'm talking to. You don't need to know about where I'm at with my free time, so to speak. And you don't need to know how much money or what I'm doing with my money. Okay. Even though, you know, as we just talked about, they want to control what their partner's doing, but they don't, listen, I'm a big boy. I'll take care of myself. You don't need to weigh in on that. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So you know, kind of as we move through this one, man, I can't imagine feeling that you know this idea of isolating, you know, that someone from their family and friends. This idea of not allowing, you know, if I were to, you know, not allow Jenny to go hang out with her friends or not go see her family, like, man, that's where, you know, I think a lot of this idea of depression, you know, we have depression that's running rampant right now in our country, you know, and I think part of it is this idea of when it comes to abuse, you know, not allowing you to go see someone. Man, that's a tough one. And the fact that that's actually a you know, but again, it's going back to the title, this power plus control. Right. You know, having that control, not allowing, you know, someone to go do something that they want to do because you want to feel like you have that control over them.
Yeah, yeah. It's the whole idea here is, again, I'll let you be around certain people. Yeah. People that will kind of either not be intimidating to me, but if it's somebody that I think could get in your ear and expose me, then you don't need to be around that person. Well, you get a little bit selective of who you allow them to be around.
So you know, obviously the work that you and Linda do, I have a question, because I've been asked this before. What are your thoughts? Because there may be some guys out there that don't want their spouse or wife to go hang out with a male friend. What are your thoughts on that? Because if a guy hears that and they're like, well, yeah, I've told my wife I don't want her to go hang out with you know a male, you know, the opposite sex friend. Yeah. What are your kind of takes on that? Because there may be a guy who feels that way.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you that we don't ever promote a lady hanging out with a male friend. Yeah. That's not good.
You're saying one-on-one.
Yeah, one-on-one. Yep. Yeah. I mean, you know, if they go out as couples, you know, that's a different story. But if a lady says, hey, I'm just going to go meet John over at the party or whatever, no. That's a whole different show, all right? Yeah. That's infidelity type stuff. Right. But, yeah, so I would never. And so, yeah, if I don't want to even open up that can of worms. I mean, what I'm talking mostly about is whether she gets to see her mom or her girlfriend,
exactly.
Anybody who could actually speak a different viewpoint about that guy.
Okay.
And so he wants to weigh in and control that.
Yep.
Here's another huge one: undermining the victim's confidence or their overall sense of self-worth.
Wow.
This one is huge. And so this will happen over time. A lot of times we will have these ladies get to a point where they're maybe not even working outside of the house anymore because that way he has even greater control of the finances, what she's doing with her time and who she's associating with. So it gets to that point where he starts to say, you know what, you're just not, you're not good at that. You mess that up. You're just better, just be at home and just take care of us, take care of the family. And so it really starts to diminish anything that she had in terms of self-worth.
Yeah.
Constantly pointing out her mistakes, constantly making her feel lower than she is. And so the idea here, I'll hear statements like this: I don't feel like I can do anything right. I don't feel like I can do anything to please him. I mean, these are huge red flags, okay, that I'm constantly being knocked down.
Yep. And I think that goes right into this next one of convincing the victim that they're crazy. Man, I'll be the first to admit, that there's times where I'm like, Jenny, you're just not thinking rationally right now, right? And I've said that.
And then she smacks you upside the head, and then we have an abuse case, right?
But I think it's just, again, going back to this idea of it being perpetual, that if you're constantly telling, the victim that all the things we've talked about before, the list of the psychology, that go into the abuse factor, like if you're constantly saying, well, you're just not thinking rationally here. You're just acting kind of crazy that you think that this is abnormal. This idea of constantly telling someone that they're crazy, almost taking away that self-worth, that they don't feel like they're worth anything because their partner is constantly telling them they're crazy. I think it's just that perpetual, psychological, warfare that you're kind of putting on the victim.
Yeah. So, you just got an idea there of many different ways that it comes about. I also think that we need to probably point out a faith component here. I have a number of situations where these people will be very much into the church or into their faith, and they will use that as a mask. Well, I don't. In fact, they'll totally mix Scripture up to support their perspective on control. Okay. And so you'll hear the phrases like, hey man, you're supposed to submit to me. That's no, we're supposed to equally submit to each other. And then the husband is to love, sacrificial love through service. So if anything, the man should actually be doubling down and servicing her and lifting her up even more. That doesn't get brought up as much. Okay. So we really want to be careful. Like we have so many, and I'll just say here in this case, we have ladies that stay in this dangerous, abusive relationship because they feel like they want to honor the marriage that they did before God, the covenant before God. And I totally respect that. I get that. And I think that I don't want to throw that away. Yeah. But the idea here that it would be manipulated and used to keep up the front to cover the abuse and the control is totally abusive to God. Okay. And so we have to be careful about using faith or religion or church as the cover up.
Yeah. That's a crazy one that I can easily see that I think in just everyday life, I feel like sometimes we manipulate Scripture to fit our narrative, whatever that we're jumping into, whatever we're doing. But Merle, as we kind of move through this, what are some of the just let's start kind of just asking some generic questions to see, again, maybe there's something here that is in the starting phase for you and your relationship. Let's just kind of dive into some questions, just to ask to see if there's something there for any of our listeners out there.
Okay, so the physical side is easy, right? Yep. If there is hitting, pushing, slapping, okay, and in the physical world, even once, Okay. And so I'll hear that, well, he only did that once, and then he apologized. Well, listen, that still doesn't take away from the idea that was abusive. Okay. Yeah. Now, again, I am going to get back in to seek whether there's a pattern here. All right. And what some of the other outside circumstances were. Were they drinking? Was there something that inflamed it? But it doesn't dismiss the idea that any of those physical things are abuse.
Yep.
The next area I just want you to be thinking about is the sexual area. We talk about this all the time. Sex is not to be used as a tool of manipulation. And we see it used by women of withholding sex oftentimes, okay? But we also see it as men of, she is obligated to provide this at my desire and will. And so it's not just the frequency of sex, but it's also the different types of sex acts. And so any kind of sexual act that she is not comfortable with or does not agree with, but is forced on her or put on her or made her feel guilty to do is abusive. And so if you're seeing that sort of thing going on, again, another red flag.
Yep. So definitely the financial aspect of this, man, full transparency has to be at the forefront. You have to have full transparency, allowing both parties in this being able to see what the other one is spending. I know Jenny and I early on in marriage, we said if we were going to spend more than $100, we had to, hey, are you good if we do this?
Right.
And whatever that looks like for you, every couple is going to look different. But man, I think the big thing is making sure just a full transparency, making sure, that there is no hiding of money. There is no separate accounts in the sense of that your spouse knows nothing about.
Right.
I think just this idea of full transparency when it comes to our finances has to be there.
Yeah. How about this is an ongoing thing of just intimidation, all right? And so intimidation can come through just flat out anger, all right, where I'm actually going to elevate the voice, the physical presence, and so that anger, threats. Well, if you it's fine, you can go do this, but this is what's probably going to happen, okay? So we're going to threaten. Oftentimes kids are thrown into the threats in terms of, I'm going to keep the kids away from you or back from you. And I see that oftentimes even from the women to the men where there can be threats of pulling back. But just any type of threatening, silence, man, like
silent treatment. Yeah,
silent treatment. If this, again, it's one thing when you both got upset and you just don't know what to say, and so you're quiet for 2 hours.
Yeah,
but you come back and you talk and you resolve and you get through it.
Yes,
it's another thing when we have this. For 3 weeks, he hasn't even talked, and now I'm just walking on eggshells, wondering what his little brain's thinking. No, it's abusive, okay?
Yep,
gaslighting, we've talked about gaslighting. So gaslighting is basically the idea of making your partner feel like they're crazy. Like, no, I think you misunderstood me. Like, this is really what I was doing. You must be thinking about that wrong. You know what? I don't, you didn't get what I was saying there, okay? How about this one? Crying. All of us have different levels of what gets us to cry, and like you've admitted, like you don't cry at all, like you're just like a rock.
I don't know about that.
But the idea of crying to manipulate or intimidate, and I'll just be blunt here. I see guys when things aren't going well and they're starting to be exposed, they'll just start bawling and crying, almost as like, please feel sorry for me, please. And I'm like, dude, pull it together. Like this cry that you have is totally irrational and it's not cool at all.
Well,
right?
I think the flip side of that too, Merle, and this is something that I fall into sometimes, because my wife and my two girls are very emotional.
Yeah.
They're all very emotional women. And like as the man, and this is something I've learned really quick with having two girls and having a very emotional wife is, man, if they're crying, there's a reason for it. Again, hoping they have the best intention. They're not just crying to, intimidate, and make you feel bad. But like if your spouse is crying, we have to allow that period for them. Again, going back to making them feel like they're crazy. Like I did this very early on in our marriage. Like, Jenny, stop crying. Like what you're crying for is not, it's not deemed, worthy to cry.
Right.
But like if your spouse is crying and your spouse is very emotional, like allowing them that time, again, there's got to be a time period where, okay, we're moving past that. But I think just calling myself out here, this is something, again, I've learned really quickly, like it is okay to cry for your spouse. We have to allow them to do that.
Yeah. And we're talking about like how it's used for manipulation.
Yes,
so all
absolutely.
of a sudden the crying card gets pulled out.
Yes,
Like, never seem to cry, but all of a sudden when things aren't going well, you pull that out.
Yep.
Okay. Just the laying down of guilt, is a big one. And just the being critical, man, highly critical. You can't do anything right. So these are some big things with the whole intimidation part of it.
Yep.
What I'd like to do is maybe move into some personality traits. Okay. And the reason why I want to move into some personality traits, and we're going to talk about the abuser here. Okay, and we're trying to give this information so the victim can start to realize it, okay? And we'll come back and talk about some of these things when we're talking about it from how we help the abuser, okay? But these are some common personality traits. And again, do not overgeneralize these. Like you see a little bit of this and you go, oh, yeah, that's my guy, okay?
Right.
But these are when you see a heavy streak of this, okay? You see a common pattern of this. One of them, a personality trait of jealousy, all right? A lot of jealousy in terms of always in comparison to see how other people are spending their time, what they're doing with their resources. Oh, well, what are you doing? Well, this is what, and then always saying how you're when you're jealous, you don't ever quite measure up. And if you're going to try to use that as manipulation, you're going to try to put the guilt on the other person to say, well, if I had what you had, okay, so there's a very jealous nature to them, and they are always trying to basically point it out and see how they're the victim of it. Okay.
Yep. So another personality trait, that is seen in some of the abusers, this idea of the controlling nature, and we've talked about it, a little bit before. Just this idea that I think part of the way in which anybody can control anybody is you induce fear, and you put a little bit of fear, like I know what's best for you, so you're going to have to do this in order to be safe, or for your overall well-being. You have to do this, and I think there's definitely circumstances where that is the case, where
Right.
I think there's definitely time and a place for that. But the problem is when that becomes the kind of the norm, and then it escalates into more things, and then all of a sudden
Right.
you're just again what we're talking about before, like you're not going to go hang out with your friends or your family, like this idea of just that constantly being in control and making sure that your partner knows that you're in control at all times. I think it's kind of where that one of the personality traits come in.
Yeah. This next one is the idea of, this one here, the inability. We've done entire shows on own it, okay? The inability to admit fault and to accept blame. The inability to do that, constant deflection, constant excuse making, and even so you'll even occasionally hear, I'm really sorry for that, but. So we've talked about that before, like the idea like they never really quite own it. Instead, they always have to cover up what they've done with some sort of excuse or reason. And so if you point out something they've done wrong and they're like very defensive of that, well, like I'm just telling you, I'm right, like this is how it is, and I know I'm right. That is a very dangerous person to be in relationship with, because there's no humility there in them, and that means there's also going to be no humbleness for the sake of dropping to their knee, surrendering. And if they can't surrender, which we're going to talk about later, they can't surrender, all bets are off.
Yeah. This next one, this idea of moving too quick in a relationship. If you're very early on in a relationship and those four little letters get put together, and the love and and then the soulmate, and you're it for me, and we're talking early on, first, second, third, fourth day, something like that. Man, I think it's a red flag, because again, it's just the idea that when you introduce emotions, especially when it comes to females, when the emotions get put in there, man, a lot of times we're not thinking logically. So, and when you start throwing out that love word, emotions run real quick,
man,
right away.
So good.
If you don't believe me, go walk through a house that you absolutely love right away, right? You love that house, and then the house gets sold out from, and you're like, oh no, the world's falling, right? I think the exact same thing when you bring emotions into things, the conscious, clear thoughts that you used to have get kind of taken out.
Abusers are the masters at manipulating emotions.
Yes.
Okay. And so you're dead on right. They will, in the good days, I love you, you're my soulmate, and they wow you, and they grab you in that way. And then it totally confuses you the next day when they're, beating you down verbally or psychologically or whatever. And so these are these things where you're like, what the heck is going on with me? Yeah, that's a very good point. So I want to talk about some of these major areas here. They desire control, power, status, respect, authority in the relationship. And when any of these are not happening at the level that they feel like they need to happen, they become fearful. Now, they do not show fear often as being afraid. They show fear in terms of doubling down and trying to overdo these things that they're afraid of. In other words, they want to control even more, right? They want to have even greater strength. And so one thing that you always have to know is that abusers are always covering something. They're always covering something, and they tend to cover with their greater strengths. So if they are a very smart person, if they're very witty, all right, they are going to cover up their weakness. Maybe they're feeling vulnerable or they're feeling intimidated. They're going to cover that up with their smarts. They're going to double down on logic, on debate, on argument. Okay, they're going to double down because that's their gift. All right. And so the same thing, if they're very good with money, they're going to double down on how they control money. And so you always have to know that when you see this pattern of abuse, this is a very insecure, scared person. They're very fearful, but they're going to double down on what they're good and strong at. And that's where you get more than you can handle of that person.
Yep. Man, it's one of the other points, Merle, you have on here, which I think is so true. When we talk about this idea of the abuser, and then I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the mental health. Obviously, it is something that our country is plagued with right now, this idea of mental health disorder. I think we have to talk about it, but we also have to separate the two in a sense of, regardless of if you feel like you're just not right in your brain, at the end of the day, abusing someone else is a choice.
You got it. Yep.
It is a choice, and I understand, the mental health is a definite part of it. But man, as a strong man and as a man, we have to understand that it is our choice that we are making to jump into this idea of abuse. All the stuff we've talked about before in this show so far. But I do think we still need to jump into this idea of mental health and how it can affect a man and how it can play into this idea of abuse. But it is not an excuse for the abuse.
Man, that's dead on, right? So mental illness is very much part of our culture, our fabric of the human condition, right?
Yes.
So, and it basically will show up in our relationships. And if we don't understand it, we will use it as an excuse, okay? So I'm going to talk about some of the extreme ones, okay? Because there's anxiety and depression and even bipolar. These are very real, okay? And they definitely can add to the abusive situation, okay? And so those are things that play into it for sure. But there are some things here that I think are really even bigger, and this is where we better get some professionals involved. Yes. And this is well above my pay grade. Okay. Okay. The idea here is the narcissistic personality disorder. That term's being thrown around like crazy these days. Okay, that guy's a narcissist. He's a narcissist. And what I obviously can't diagnose people with narcissism. I'm not qualified to do that. But I can recognize narcissistic behaviors. And so I do occasionally say, well, that that is a narcissistic sort of thing that you're doing. You're behaving in that way. And if I can just kind of give you an idea, that narcissistic behavior is a person who cannot see life through other people's eyes. They can't connect with it at an emotional level. Like, in other words, they can't feel your pain. They can only see life through their eyes, or they're making a very conscious choice just to see it through their eyes, okay? And so however they're doing life, they always have to see it, how it affects them, how it impacts them, what it's going to do to them. And no matter who it's hurting, bothering, upsetting, they just have a very difficult time seeing that. And so that's that narcissistic personality disorder. All of us have a level of narcissism in us. It's called selfishness, okay? It is called the great sin, all right? It is the sin that separates us from God. And so we're not talking about just a general, I'm kind of a selfish person. It's when I can't, for the life of me, like, I don't I don't really care what you think. I can't see things through your eyes. So that's a personality disorder that we really want to be aware of, and that trend runs very heavy in the abuse situations.
Yeah, I mean, this next one, this idea of the borderline personality disorder, man, just thinking about, I've heard people say this, like, man, when they get angry, they're a different person. When, man, they go through these mood swings. They're a different person sometimes when they wake up, and then, the next day they wake up and they're a completely different, mood, and they're a completely different person. I just think, there's something there, whether it be the anger issue, whether you do have mood swings that are so drastic that someone doesn't even recognize you. This is a real thing that happens. Again, it is not an excuse for any type of abuse. It is still a choice at the end of the day. You should feel like you have total control. You have to own the idea you have total control when you do get angry, because it is a normal emotion for us to have anger.
Yeah.
It is what we do with that anger that's when the real issue, that's when the abuse can actually happen. So you are able to have highs and lows in your day, and the way in which you feel, your moods. You're allowed to be angry, but man, when there's almost like this different personality that you're presenting to your spouse, to the person you're living with, and it's causing them to feel completely, where they don't even feel like they're a part of, this relationship, this two-part, to the relationship. When you're actually making them feel less than because of the way in which you are, that's when I think that this personality, disorder really kind of shows its ugly face.
Yeah. So those are big ones. Then we talk about the psychopath and stuff like that. That's a whole different level. These people can't even, they don't even feel guilt. They don't connect with any of that. And so that is definitely a different level of something we need to be aware of and really guard from interacting with. There's really one podcast. It was broken into 2 shows. I have to share. It's going to be in the show notes, and I'm going to include it in that, because this guy, this is Dr. David Clarke, and this is his career. Okay, he's a psychologist and a family therapist, but this has been his career for 35 years of working with these situations. And he was on Family Life Today back in June, I think it was. And so I'm going to include those 2 shows. It's a 2-parter, kind of like what we're doing. But man, you've got to listen to him. If you get a chance, listen to him. He's even in the trenches deeper than what Linda and I are, and he just speaks very boldly. He's not a mealy mouth like, well, I don't know. He brings it, okay? And so those, I will make sure that those 2 shows are put in the notes. All right. So bottom line, if any of this clicked with you, whether from a victim status or from an abuser status, you got to get help. You've got to get help, okay? If you are in the victim role here, first and foremost, safety.
Yes.
Safety is first. Physical safety first, okay? And so that sometimes involves going to a safe place, a safe haven. We have to be able to go get help. right? In our area here where we are, we have a facility called Safe Passage. It's located in Batesville, Indiana. You can look that up, Safe Passage. They're very private, so that everything's very confidential. You can't even find their place, okay, until you call them and you figure out where you can go, because they do that for the sake of protecting you. If you're physically in danger, we don't need to tell everybody in the world where you are, okay? And so you've got to get that help. If you're wondering, like, you know what, I'm seeing a lot of these traits. I feel like, I'm shining a light on this. You need to talk to someone. It might first just be a trusted, confidential friend to just start brainstorming and just airing this out. Like, and sometimes I need a sounding board. Like, am I thinking right? Like, is it, because a lot of times the abuser will say, "Oh no, I'm just overthinking it. Like, it's really not that bad. I mean, other people have it worse than me." You hear those kinds of phrases, and so you have to have somebody that you can bounce this stuff off of. So get a friend, get a family member, get somebody that you can do that with. If you're like, man, I don't even know where to go with that, seek counseling help. I mean, you can contact us at Rock Solid Families. You can go to our website, rocksolidfamilies.org. You can call our office, 812-576-7625. If you're a female, you're going to get hooked up with Linda. If you're a guy, you're going to get hooked up with me. And, we'll just walk through it. We don't have all the answers to these things. We have to figure them out with you. So please get yourself help. There is a national domestic violence hotline. I'm going to give that number. It's a national domestic violence hotline. It's 800-799-SAFE, SAFE. That's 7233. All right. And they also have a website, domesticshelters.org. Okay. So it's not a joke, right? And it doesn't mean that just because you open up this can of worms that people are going to prison and all this stuff. What we're trying to do is get people help and healthy. All right. Yes. And so let's not mess with it.
Yep. Good deal, man. This is some heavy stuff. We got another part coming up where we're actually going to talk about jumping into the abuser and kind of looking at that a little bit more. So stay tuned for our next show. Really do appreciate you guys out there. Continue to listen to us. Continue to share. Thanks so much for our sponsors. We kind of have to have you guys to keep doing this, so we really do appreciate them. Stay tuned for our next parts, and hope you guys are having a good week and go out there and be some strong dads.
Casey's is a premier garden center and gift shop located in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. Casey's offers a wide selection of plants, landscaping materials, home and garden decor, and gifts for every occasion. Casey's is committed to providing exceptional service, a unique shopping experience, and value to every customer. Stop in and see what makes Casey's so unique. Located at 21481 State Line Road, Lawrenceburg, Indiana, or call 812-537-3800. Let Casey's help you add beauty to your home.